December 21, 1939, Kola sector, eastern Finland. Soviet Lieutenant Viktor Petrov pressed his eye to the scope of his Mosin-Nagants 9130, scanning the snow-covered forest line 400 meters ahead. His unit had lost 11 men in 3 days to an invisible enemy. No muzzle flashes, no movement, just sudden death arriving from positions the Soviets swore they'd already cleared. Petrov's scope was state-of-the-art, a 3.5x PU optic that should have given him every advantage. The frost had forced him to remove his glove to adjust the focus ring. His fingertips burned against the metal. Then he saw it. A shadow moved near a snow-covered pine. Petrov centered his crosshairs, compensating for wind and distance exactly as his instructors had taught him. He squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked across the frozen landscape. Through his scope, Petrov watched bark explode from the tree, 2 feet left of where he'd aimed. Before he could work the bolt, the world went white. The bullet entered just below his right eye. When Finnish troops examined his body that evening, they found something that would puzzle Soviet commanders for months. Petrov's rifle was equipped with one of their best optical sights. His shooting position was textbook. His range estimation had been perfect. What killed him was a Finnish sniper using iron sights, a technique the Soviets considered hopelessly primitive. What the Red Army would discover over the next 3 months would force them to question everything they knew about modern marksmanship. And the man teaching Finnish snipers to outshoot scoped rifles with bare metal sights would become the most lethal individual combatant in military history. For 3 weeks, the Winter War had been going catastrophically wrong for the Soviet Union. Stalin had expected Finland to collapse within days. Instead, his massive invasion force was bleeding into the snow. By late December 1939, Soviet casualties in the Finnish theater had exceeded 127,000 men against a defending force that numbered only 180,000 total. The disparity wasn't just embarrassing, it was strategically dangerous. Nazi Germany was watching, calculating Soviet military competence with predatory interest. The Finnish advantage came down to terrain, tactics, and individual marksmanship. While Soviet conscripts advanced in massed formations through forests they didn't understand, Finnish soldiers, many of them hunters and farmers who'd grown up in these woods, picked them apart with precision rifle fire. The Mosin-Nagants M2830 was Finland's standard infantry rifle. Based on the Russian Mosin-Nagants design, Finnish modifications had improved the trigger and barrel quality, but the real Finnish advantage wasn't the weapon itself. It was how they'd learned to aim it. Soviet doctrine emphasized scoped rifles for designated snipers. The PU and PE scopes gave 3.5x magnification, a clear technological edge over iron sights. Soviet training manuals calculated that scoped rifles extended effective engagement range by 200 meters and doubled first shot hit probability. The mathematics made sense. The reality in Finnish forests told a different story. Our scoped rifles are useless in this cold, Soviet sniper Fyodor Oklopkov would later write in his memoirs. The lenses fog, the mounts shift. You spend more time fighting the equipment than fighting the enemy. Finland's winter temperatures regularly dropped to -40 degrees Celsius. At those temperatures, optical scopes became liabilities. Breath condensation froze on eyepieces instantly. Scope mounts contracted differently than rifle barrels, throwing off zero. The extra weight made rifles slower to shoulder in sudden encounters. Finnish snipers understood something their Soviet counterparts were learning too late. In winter warfare, the best optic is the one that can't fail, but that created a different problem. Iron sights, simple notch and post arrangements, were reliable in any temperature, but they were also limited. Standard military iron sight doctrine taught engagement out to 300 meters maximum. Beyond that, The front sight post covered too much of the target for precision work. The Soviets had numerical superiority and better equipment. They could afford to close engagement ranges. Finnish defenders couldn't. They needed to kill at distance consistently with basic equipment that military experts considered obsolete for serious marksmanship. Most Finnish military instructors taught standard iron sight technique. Align the front post in the rear notch. Place the tip on your target. Squeeze. It worked for infantry combat, but it wasn't enough for the kind of long-range precision that could stop Soviet advances. Then reports started filtering up through Finnish command about one instructor whose students were consistently outperforming everyone else. His name was Simo Häyhä, a 34-year-old farmer from the Rautjärvi region who'd served his mandatory military service years earlier. He'd been called up when the war started and assigned to the 34th Infantry Regiment's 6th Company. What made Häyhä's performance unusual wasn't just his kill count, which was already becoming remarkable. It was his complete refusal to use a scoped rifle, despite being offered one multiple times. He claimed iron sights were superior. His commanders thought he was crazy. His results suggested otherwise. For the Soviet soldiers dying in increasing numbers in the Kola sector, Häyhä's technique was becoming a lethal mystery. They were being killed at ranges that shouldn't have been possible with iron sights, by a shooter who left almost no trace of his position. The Soviets brought in counter-sniper teams with the best equipment the Red Army could provide. They studied Finnish tactics and adjusted their own movements accordingly. Their casualties in the Kola sector continued to climb. Soviet intelligence officers studied the reports with increasing frustration. Finnish snipers were achieving consistent kills at 400 to 450 meters, distances that Soviet doctrine considered the outer limit of scoped rifle effectiveness. The idea that Finnish soldiers were doing this with iron sights seemed impossible. Soviet military science had thoroughly analyzed optical versus iron sight performance. The data was conclusive. Scoped rifles delivered superior accuracy at extended ranges. This wasn't opinion, it was physics. The Finnish claims of iron sight proficiency beyond 300 meters are almost certainly propaganda. A Soviet intelligence assessment from January 1940 concluded, enemy snipers are likely using improvised or captured optical equipment and reporting iron sights to maintain morale advantages with their infantry. The Soviets weren't being arrogant. They were following legitimate tactical analysis. Every modern military had reached the same conclusion. Scopes extended effective range and increased hit probability. The Germans agreed. The British agreed. The Americans agreed. What they didn't understand was that Häyhä wasn't using standard iron sight technique. The Soviet response was methodical. They deployed dedicated counter-sniper teams, equipped with 4 AUS PE-scoped Mosin-Nagants and extensive winter warfare training. They studied the trees where shots had originated, calculated likely positions, and established overlapping fields of fire. The counter-sniper teams arrived in the Kola sector on January 8, 1940. Within 72 hours, 3 of their best shooters were dead, all killed by the same invisible enemy. Finnish soldiers who served alongside Häyhä described something that made Soviet assumptions even more baffling. He didn't just refuse scopes, he modified his rifle's iron sights in ways that seemed to make them worse. Standard Mosin-Nagant iron sights consisted of a hooded front post and an adjustable rear notch. Häyhä filed down the front sight post to roughly half its original height. Military armorers considered this borderline sabotage. A lower front sight meant less material to catch the eye, making target acquisition slower and less precise. But Häyhä's kill rate kept climbing. By late January, Soviet units operating in the Kola sector had identified Häyhä by reputation, if not by sight. They called him Belaya Smrt, White Death. The name spread through Soviet lines with the kind of dread usually reserved for artillery bombardments. Soviet commanders offered bounties for his capture or elimination. They deployed entire squads with orders to locate and eliminate the single Finnish sniper who'd become a psychological weapon as effective as any artillery battery. What frustrated Soviet planners most was the impossibility of the situation. Their soldiers had better equipment, better training doctrine, and numerical superiority, but they were being systematically hunted by a man using a rifle technique that every military expert agreed was obsolete. Then came February 17, 1940, the day Soviet tactics would finally adapt, though not in time to matter. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what you know about Simo Häyhä and Finnish Winter War tactics. Drop a comment below and let me know if you'd heard about the White Death before, and if you're enjoying these deep dives into World War II history, hit that subscribe button. These stories take serious research to get the details right, and knowing you're out there makes it all worthwhile. Simo Häyhä was not a dramatic man. He spoke little, kept meticulous records of his kills, and approached sniping with the methodical patience of a farmer waiting for harvest. His crazy technique had evolved from years of hunting elk and moose in Finnish forests, where a missed shot meant lost meat and wasted ammunition. He'd developed his method through trial, error, and thousands of rounds fired at game that wouldn't stand still for scope adjustments. The modification was deceptively simple. By filing down the front sight post to approximately 40% of its original height, Häyhä had solved the fundamental limitation of iron sights at distance. Standard military doctrine taught shooters to place the front sight post's tip on the target. At 300 meters, a standard front post subtended roughly 12 inches of vertical space, covering center mass on a human torso. At 400 meters, that same post covered 16 inches, making precise shot placement guesswork. Häyhä's filed-down front sight subtended only 5 to 6 inches at 400 meters. The smaller post gave him a finer aiming reference, allowing precision comparable to what scoped rifles achieved through magnification. But the technique required something optical sights couldn't teach: absolute mastery of holdover. January 26, 1940, 6:23 a.m., Kola sector, temperature minus 43 degrees Celsius. Häyhä lay in a snow hollow he'd prepared 3 hours earlier. His position was 30 meters behind the actual tree line, far enough back that Soviet observers scanning for muzzle flashes would look past him. He'd packed snow in front of his position and poured water on it the night before, creating an ice screen that would minimize the vapor signature from his rifle's muzzle blast. His Mosin-Nagants M2830 rested on packed snow, no bipod, no sandbag. The rifle was an extension of his body, positioned so naturally that aiming required almost no muscle tension. Through the pre-dawn darkness, a Soviet patrol moved into the clearing 380 meters ahead. 12 men in winter camouflage, weapons at low ready, moving with the cautious discipline of soldiers who knew they were being hunted. Häyhä watched them through his iron sights. The filed-down front post appeared as a small vertical line bisecting the rear notch. He didn't center it on any specific soldier, not yet. The patrol leader raised his hand. The unit stopped. The leader pulled out binoculars and began scanning the tree line. Häyhä placed the front sight post on the man's chest. At 380 meters, he knew the bullet would drop approximately 28 inches below his point of aim. He raised the front sight until it sat level with the top of the man's head, a holdover technique called aim high, hit low, that hunters had used for generations, but military doctrine had largely abandoned in favor of scope adjustments. The patrol leader lowered his binoculars. Häyhä's trigger broke clean at 1,500 grams of pressure. exactly the weight he'd adjusted it to. The rifle recoiled into his shoulder with familiar force. Through the iron sights, Häyhä watched the patrol leader collapse. Before the other Soviet soldiers could react, he worked the bolt with practiced efficiency. The spent casing ejected into a cloth bag positioned to catch it, preventing the brass from landing in snow, where its gleam might give away his position. Second target, a soldier dropping to prone 15 meters left of the first. Different range, different holdover. Häyhä adjusted his aim point. The front sight rose to the soldier's shoulder line. His trigger broke again. The bullet struck center mass. The remaining Soviet soldiers scattered, returning fire toward the tree line. Their shots impacted 40 meters ahead of Häyhä's actual position. The ice screen he'd built was working. The muzzle blast was dispersing through the porous ice rather than creating a visible flash signature. Third target, a soldier trying to drag the patrol leader's body to cover. Range approximately 395 meters. The man was moving, which meant Häyhä had to lead the target and account for holdovers simultaneously. The mathematics happened instinctively. Years of shooting-running game had trained his brain to calculate lead and drop without conscious thought. The front sight post tracked ahead of the moving soldier, rose to account for bullet drop, and stopped. The trigger broke. The soldier stumbled and fell. 9 Soviet soldiers remained. They were firing wildly now, burning through ammunition without clear targets. Häyhä chambered another round, but he didn't fire. The patrol was broken. They would retreat soon, and killing them during withdrawal risked revealing his position for targets that no longer posed immediate threat. Discipline, not aggression, was what kept snipers alive. The remaining soldiers pulled back into the forest, carrying 2 wounded and leaving 3 dead in the clearing. Häyhä waited another 40 minutes perfectly still before slowly backing out of his position. He moved 200 meters laterally through the forest before standing upright. By the time Soviet counter-sniper teams arrived to investigate the shooting position, he would be back at Finnish lines, cleaning his rifle and recording 3 more kills in his logbook. The engagement had lasted 4 minutes. Häyhä had fired 3 shots. 3 Soviet soldiers were dead at ranges that Soviet doctrine insisted were impossible for iron sights. When his company commander asked him how he maintained such precision without a scope, Häyhä's answer was characteristically brief. "I aim where I need the bullet to go. The sights just tell me where the barrel is pointing." What seemed like mysticism was actually pure mechanics, a technique that eliminated the variables that made scopes fail while exploiting advantages that optical sights couldn't provide. Finnish military instructors began studying Häyhä's technique in detail after his kill count exceeded 200, confirmed in February 1940. What they discovered was a complete reimagining of how iron sights could be employed. The filed-down front sight was only the most visible modification. The real innovation was in Häyhä's understanding of parallax and sight picture. Standard military iron sight doctrine taught a 6 o'clock hold, placing the front sight post at the bottom edge of the target and letting the bullet impact rise above the sight picture. This worked for close-range infantry combat, but became increasingly imprecise beyond 250 meters as bullet drop accelerated. Häyhä's technique used what modern shooters would call a center hold with extreme holdover. He placed his filed-down front sight precisely where he wanted the bullet to impact, then raised the entire sight picture to compensate for drop. This required memorizing exact holdover values for every 25-meter increment from 200 to 500 meters. He knew his rifle like a craftsman knows his tools, Finnish Lieutenant Jukka Jutalainen later wrote. Ask him the holdover for 425 meters in 20-kilometer wind. He'd answer without hesitation. The numbers were burned into his muscle memory. The technique's second critical advantage was speed. Scoped rifles required shooters to achieve perfect eye relief, the precise distance between eye and scope for a clear sight picture. In winter clothing with multiple layers, this added precious seconds to target acquisition. Häyhä's iron sights worked with any head position. He could shoulder his rifle and fire in under 2 seconds. Soviet counter-snipers with scopes needed 4 to 5 seconds to achieve the same shot. Testing by Finnish military instructors revealed the technique's limitations. It required extraordinary vision. Häyhä's visual acuity tested at 2012, significantly better than normal. It demanded thousands of practice rounds to memorize holdover values, and it was useless in low-light conditions where the small front sight post became invisible. But in the specific conditions of the Winter War, bright snow backgrounds, daylight operations, temperatures that made scopes unreliable, Häyhä's technique offered measurable advantages. The most significant benefit was weapon reliability. Scoped Mosin-Nagants stood 8 centimeters taller when prone due to scope height, making the shooter's profile more visible. The scope added 680 grams of weight, slowing weapon handling, and scope failures in extreme cold were common enough that Soviet snipers carried backup iron-sighted rifles. Häyhä never needed backup equipment. His rifle functioned identically in -40 degrees as it did in +10. The sights couldn't fog, couldn't lose zero, couldn't fail. Finnish command distributed technical bulletins describing Häyhä's technique to other sniper instructors. Some adopted it, most didn't. The training investment was too high, and the technique required natural shooting talent that couldn't be taught to average soldiers. But for elite Finnish snipers, the method proved devastatingly effective. 7 other Finnish snipers using variations of Häyhä's iron sight technique achieved over 100 confirmed kills each during the Winter War. Extraordinary numbers for a conflict that lasted only 105 days. Soviet intelligence eventually captured a Finnish sniper and interrogated him about the techniques being used. Their report concluded that Finnish marksmanship superiority came from unconventional holdover methods, inappropriate for replication in Red Army doctrine. The Soviets weren't wrong to dismiss it. Häyhä's technique couldn't be mass-produced. It required individual excellence rather than systemic training. For a military focused on standardized doctrine across millions of soldiers, the approach made no strategic sense. For the Finnish soldiers defending their homeland with limited resources, individual excellence was all they had. Häyhä's technique turned that necessity into an asymmetric advantage that killed hundreds of Soviet soldiers who'd made the fatal mistake of assuming better technology meant better lethality. By March 13, 1940, when the Winter War ended with a negotiated peace, Simo Häyhä had achieved 505 confirmed sniper kills in 98 days of combat, an average of 515 kills per day, the highest confirmed sniper kill count in any major war. He didn't survive to see the war's end entirely intact. On March 6th, a Soviet explosive bullet struck Häyhä's jaw, destroying much of his lower face. Finnish soldiers found him unconscious in blood-soaked snow and assumed he was dead. He regained consciousness a week later, the day peace was declared. Häyhä was promoted to second lieutenant by field promotion, a rare honor in the Finnish military structure. He received multiple decorations but gave no interviews, and refused to discuss his techniques with journalists. The Soviet casualties in the Winter War totaled 323,000 dead, against Finnish losses of 70,000. While Soviet numerical superiority eventually forced territorial concessions, the strategic cost was catastrophic. Nazi Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941 was partially predicated on Stalin's military appearing vulnerable after the Finnish debacle. Häyhä's technique influenced Finnish sniper doctrine throughout the continuation war, 1941 and 1944, when Finland fought alongside Germany against renewed Soviet invasion. Finnish snipers continued achieving disproportionate kill ratios using modified iron sights, though none matched Häyhä's individual totals. The technique never spread to other militaries. American, British, and German forces continued developing advanced optical sights, correctly identifying that for general military use, scopes offered more advantages than drawbacks. The M1C Garand with M73 scope, the German ZF-41, and British No. 32 telescopic sights represented the future of military marksmanship. But Häyhä had proven something military theorists often forgot. Optimal technology depends on operational context. In winter warfare above the Arctic Circle, the most advanced equipment was the equipment that worked when needed. Modern military historians calculate that Häyhä's 505 confirmed kills, each requiring independent verification by an officer, likely represented roughly 800 total Soviet casualties, including unconfirmed kills and wounded. For a single soldier operating over 98 days, the statistical impact was equivalent to eliminating an entire Soviet battalion. Soviet veterans who survived the Kola sector rarely discussed their experiences. The psychological impact of being hunted by an invisible enemy using supposedly inferior equipment created trauma that lasted decades. A 1975 interview with Soviet veteran Dmitry Dontsov captured the lingering unease. "We had everything they didn't. Better rifles, more men, more ammunition. It didn't matter. The forest belonged to them." Simo Häyhä lived until 2002, dying at age 96. He never wrote a memoir. He gave only 2 interviews after the war, both in Finnish publications. When asked how he became the deadliest sniper in history, his answer was consistent: "I did what needed to be done. Nothing more." The Finnish government preserved his rifle in the Finnish Military Museum in Helsinki. The filed-down front sight is still visible, a small modification that killed more Soviet soldiers than some entire Finnish battalions. Superior technology creates confidence. Confidence creates assumptions. Assumptions create vulnerabilities. The Soviet Union entered Finland with every measurable advantage. They had optical scopes that magnified targets and extended range. They had trained snipers schooled in modern doctrine. They had numerical superiority that should have made individual excellence irrelevant. What they didn't have was a soldier who'd spent 30 years learning his weapon so intimately that he'd transcended the need for mechanical aids. Häyhä's technique worked because it eliminated dependencies, no scope that could fog, no adjustment turrets that could freeze, no added weight that could slow target acquisition, just a rifle, simple sights, an absolute mastery of ballistics that couldn't be taught from manuals. The lesson extends beyond winter warfare. Every military technological advance creates new capabilities, but it also creates new failure points, new training requirements, new logistics chains. The side that wins isn't always the side with the best equipment. It's the side that best matches their capabilities to the operational environment. One filed-down front sight post. One soldier who understood that precision didn't require magnification, only disciplined patience and intimate knowledge of his weapon's ballistics. 505 Soviet soldiers died, learning that sometimes the simplest solution, executed with excellence, defeats the most sophisticated technology executed with mere competence. The sights don't make the shooter. The shooter makes the sights work. If you found this story as fascinating as I did researching it, I'd appreciate if you'd like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are dozens more untold stories from World War II that deserve to be remembered, and I'll be bringing you a new one every week. What should I cover next? Let me know in the comments below.